Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, November the 25th, 2024. Today or tomorrow, Mercury goes stationary retrograde, and this is something I will be looking at in this video. What does it mean? What's special about this particular station of Mercury? Now, this is when Mercury comes to an absolute standstill before starting to go backwards from the Earth's perspective. And it can affect all of us, but maybe it will affect some people more than others. So it might be a good idea to look at some famous people, and also just to consider what the general astrological environment is at that moment when Mercury goes retrograde. But before I look at that in detail, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today. Usual reminder, if you like this video, then I'd be very grateful if you were to indeed like it. And if you're not subscribed and you like the video, I would of course be really, really grateful if you were to subscribe. I've just got 8,000 subscribers, and I have this fantasy of getting to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, but I think that is just very, very unlikely. But maybe if I can get to 9,000 subscribers by the end of the year, that would be really good. That's perhaps my target. Anyway, let's look at what's happening today. So here we have top right, by the way, we've got a few people whom I think might be influenced by Mercury going stationary retrograde. Donald Trump, Olaf Scholz, who I think is still the Chancellor of Germany, and Zelensky, President of Ukraine. I think he could be influenced by it. And I put a nuclear cloud there just to remind us that this is a very, very stressful times that we're living in. Between now and Donald Trump becoming president, with many people in Biden and Starmer and in the UK and the French doing their absolute level best to provoke the Russians between now and Trump becoming president, and it's dangerous times, and so there is a nuclear threat, and I think there is actually something going on at the time of Mercury going stationary retrograde that is a cause for concern. But of course, it's unlikely to come to a nuclear war. But I think we should continue to be concerned anyway, as far as looking at what's happening today. So that's actually the exact time that Mercury goes retrograde. I'll be coming on to that in a moment. So here's the chart for today, set for noon. So you can see that the moon is just edging into Libra. So at noon, New York time, the moon is at 2:47 Libra. So we've got this changeover. We've got the moon moving out of Virgo into Libra, so I suppose that means that perhaps things feel a little bit easier. Maybe things are sort of a bit lighter. We may enjoy conversation a bit more, and perhaps some of us will feel that it's important to interact with other people, to understand other people, not to do anything to rock the boat. But we don't want to take it too far, because the moon is making a conjunction to the south node. So moon conjunct south node may indicate a time where our immediate reactions are not necessarily the right reaction. So moon conjunct south node, it may be, for example, that our immediate inclination is to compromise or to make peace or try very hard to understand another person's perspective. But maybe we can take this too far. The North Node is in Aries. It is a time when we should be asserting ourselves. We should be making it very clear, what we believe in, what we think. And so, with Moon conjunct South Node, the line of least resistance is perhaps to to compromise, to make everyone happy, but that might not actually be the right thing to do. Now, I should say that the moon moves into Libra at 11:20 a.m. London time. So that means that if you're in the Americas, then the moon is certainly in Libra all day, pretty much. I mean, it moves into Libra very, very early in the morning. So if you're in the Americas, you can sort of regard it as being a moon in Libra day. If you're in Europe, then the last half of the day is moon in Libra. First half of the day, perhaps until sort of, certainly in the UK, that would be 11:20 in the morning. In sort of Paris, Berlin, that would be 12:20 in the afternoon, around lunchtime. So it may be more of a split day, first part of the day being moon in Virgo, second half of the day moon in Libra. If you are in Australia and New Zealand, then the moon doesn't really move into Libra until the end of the day. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it's really a moon in Virgo day. Now, as far as aspects are concerned, just before the moon moves into Libra, the moon makes a trine to Uranus and an opposition to Neptune. These are lunar aspects. They're fast moving, but moon trine Uranus at the beginning of the day, maybe we might feel that we can sort of make things happen. If we're not happy with the way things are going, we can perhaps stir things up, maybe. But in a sort of a gentle way. It's moon trine Uranus, not square Uranus, so that's relatively harmless. Then the moon moves into Libra, and the moment the moon moves into Libra, it makes a trine to Pluto. And so moon trine Pluto, perhaps we need to ask ourselves how we can change things. So moon moving into Libra, many of us are going to become more socially aware, but at the same time, we may be aware of how we can reconfigure things. Moon trine Pluto is about creating gentle change, so we shouldn't necessarily be happy with the status quo. And that takes me back to perhaps the moon conjunct the South Node. The moon conjunct South Node is we should not be doing what comes easiest. We take what is around us, and we don't just accept it at face value. We see what we can do to change it, and I think that is something we can do. And also, the moon is making a sextile to the sun. So moon makes trine to Pluto, and then it makes a sextile to the sun. Moon sextile sun is a really nice aspect, and it's about harmony. It's about the life force. It's about being in balance. So I think many of us may just feel that things are easier now that with moon sextile sun, we can get on with people and we can assert ourselves, but without causing too much disruption. Now there's a question of Mercury going stationary retrograde. Now, from a European perspective, and further east, Australia, New Zealand, for example, actually Mercury goes stationary retrograde tomorrow on Tuesday. So sort of London time, in fact, Mercury goes stationary retrograde. I think it's at 2:41 a.m. on Tuesday. So if you're in Europe when you wake up tomorrow, Mercury will be stationary retrograde. Will be retrograde. When you go to bed, unless you go to bed really late on Monday night, then the moon will still be direct. Now, if you're in the Americas, then moon will go stationary retrograde sort of this evening. So it kind of depends on your time zone, but I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about Mercury retrograde in detail today rather than tomorrow. And even though for most of today, or perhaps all of today, Mercury is technically not retrograde, I think we can still feel it coming to a standstill. Should I say grinding to a standstill? Things may be slowing down. Things may not be as fast as usual, and we may be starting to have second thoughts. And, in fact, we may be starting to have negative thoughts as well, because Mercury goes stationary retrograde quite close to the fixed star Ras Al Harg. Ras Al Harg is the head of the head of the snake charmer. I think Ras Al Hag is the brightest star in the constellation of Ophiuchus. And so it's not a particularly fortunate star, Ras Al Hag, and it can be about disputes, it can be about difficulties in relationships. And so perhaps with Mercury going stationary retrograde close to Ras Al Hag, it may be that the things we say could be disruptive. We may, and also we're just very aware of perhaps our own and other people's capacity for causing malice through what they say. That is one way of looking at Ras Al Hag. But overall, Mercury conjunct Ras Al Hag is not a particularly fortunate event. And I suppose we have a mitigator in the fact that Mercury is in mutual reception to Jupiter. But, because Mercury is in Sagittarius, Jupiter's sign, Jupiter is in Gemini, Mercury is sign, so perhaps it's not quite as bad as it could be. But, I think on balance, Mercury going stationary retrograde is a difficult time for us. And in this video, at the end of this video, I will be looking in detail about Mercury going retrograde. Now, I say difficult time for us. Who am I talking about? I have the kind of theory that Mercury retrograde only affects people who believe in astrology. Maybe if you don't believe in astrology, Mercury retrograde is not particularly important, I suppose. Mercury goes retrograde a lot. It's not an unusual event, and people are often very successful when Mercury is retrograde. It's not necessarily a problem. So I don't think we need to be too concerned about it, and maybe we just won't notice it. So that is certainly a possibility. Now, that is the chart for noon at New York. So you want to look at the chart for noon in Sydney, Australia. So you see noon, Sydney, Australia, the moon is at 24 Virgo. So if that was noon in, say, Auckland in New Zealand, it would be even earlier in Virgo. So that reminds us that if you are in Australia or New Zealand, that moon in Libra is really more about tomorrow, and it is a moon in Virgo day. And I suppose the main aspect, aside from whatever Mercury is doing, is going to be moon trine Uranus. So in Australasia today may be about moon trine Uranus, perhaps stirring things up. Moon in Virgo, I suppose, responding to the way we see the world and responding to the way we see the details in the world, and perhaps through our responses we can sort of shake things up, but in a rather gentle way. Then there is the heliocentric picture. So looking at today's planets from a heliocentric point of view, just a reminder, we don't really have to worry about Mercury going retrograde, because from a heliocentric perspective, the planets just go round and round the sun in a single direction. So planets do not go retrograde in a heliocentric heliocentric universe, or at least a heliocentric solar system. So Mars is still quincunx Pluto. So Mars is heliocentrically is at 155 Cancer at noon in New York, and so it's still making that quincunx to Pluto. And so you might perceive that Mars quincunx Pluto as being about perhaps violence, the threat of violence, fear of violence, at least on from an international perspective. A lot of people at the moment are concerned about nuclear war. It took people long enough. I think that it's always amazed me how unconcerned people have been during the Ukraine conflict about nuclear war. I remember the 80s in London going on the CND marches. That was something, it is sort of the Every autumn there was a CND march, protest against nuclear proliferation, and it was it was almost almost a rip, something one always did, and one was afraid of it, and it was something that bothered people. But now people don't seem to be so bothered, and I do find that concerning. But maybe people are starting to become bothered, particularly after Russia fired this ICBM at that factory in Dnipro in Ukraine. But Mars quincunx Pluto is about that struggle, not necessarily just to do with Ukraine. It just could be the world in general. It could be us. I mean, it is a heliocentric aspect, so maybe we won't take it personally, but I suppose it's possible that the collective does become the personal. So that's probably the main thing going on. And as far as anything else, so the Earth is at 3 Gemini. The Earth is moving away from a trine to Pluto in the same way that the Sun is moving away from a sextile to Pluto. The Sun is moving away from a sextile to Pluto geocentrically. So you could say Mars quincunx Pluto, Sun trine Pluto. There's just a sense here of dealing with heavy forces, things that are perhaps outside our control, and they might be somewhat worrying. And I think that's about it. So let's now look at things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, November the 25th, 2024. Aries. Aries, the moon is changing sign. It's moving from Virgo to Libra. And I think from your perspective, that's quite an important sign change. It means that you may find that you have to consider what other people want. I mean, you might not want to consider what other people want, but you might just feel that you have no choice. And in the first instance, that might bother you, because you've got your own priorities, and you don't want to have to spend a long time worrying about what other people are doing and having to accommodate them. So try to get some perspective on it. First of all, Aries, it's you that matters. I mean, it really is. It's you that matters, and in most cases, you're the one in the right. You're the one that knows what to do. And at the same time, Aries, you might perhaps uncharacteristically feel that you should be spending more time on accommodating other people's needs. And I think that's quite natural with the moon conjunct Libra. Sorry, with the moon moving into Libra. But the moon is making a conjunction to the South Node. And so with the moon making conjunction to the South Node, the suggestion here is that you need to put yourself first and not accommodate other people without good reason, and always consider what's best for yourself. But at the same time, you don't want to give the impression of being selfish. So you could say, Aries, that things have to be explained, and people have to understand your perspective, and at the same time you have to listen to what other people are saying, and perhaps having listened to what people are saying, or at least gone through the motions of listening, you can then make your own decision. And I think that is something that you can do, and I think that you can be effective about it. And perhaps you have to give people a good reason for following your lead. So if you want someone to do something, you have to explain why they need to do it your way. And in order to do that, perhaps you have to look at things from their perspective. So that is perhaps the best way of dealing with the moon moving through starting to move into Libra. And while this is going on, I think, Aries, you're probably going to be quite aware of power dynamics. And I think the reason you're going to be aware of power dynamics is because Mars, which is your ruler, is quincunx Pluto from a heliocentric perspective. So we just looked at the heliocentric chart. We saw that Mars was making that quincunx to Pluto. And I do think that could affect you. And I think that for you, the issue of power could actually be very important. And it's not necessarily easy. You know you need to be in control, but you need to be in control in the right way. And finding the right way to assert yourself just may be a little bit difficult. Your first attempts might not work, but perhaps you try again, and you experiment a bit. And then in the end, Aries, I think you will find the right way of perhaps being a leader and getting people to take you seriously. But you don't have to worry, as I've said at the beginning, you don't have to worry too much about other people. It's you that matters. Just give people a little bit of consideration and understanding. And one other thing to point out, Aries, is that you are quite an engaging person. People like you, and they find you interesting, and you give the impression that you've always got more to offer. You've got something to say. You've got something to inspire people with, and so make use of that. And in that way, you'll be able to get the balance right. You'll be able to do things your way, but at the same time, I don't think anyone's going to be too unhappy about it. Taurus, you may feel that some things are just a little bit out of sync, that maybe a few things have gone too far and that they need to be looked at again, and that you need to sort of make sure that really everything is truly in order. And I think that it just may be fundamentally, Taurus, that there's just a lack of balance. And if you think about it, just a general lack of balance in your life, that certain things have gone too far, some things have perhaps been ignored, and you need to get things back in the right order. And how do you achieve that? I think it's actually quite difficult to do this in a sort of a mechanistic way. It's like, I suppose, from a sort of an environmental perspective, there is this concept of mitigation, that you can mitigate, that you can, for example, if you damage the environment in one way, you can mitigate it in another way. So, for example, if you travel by plane and you melt however many tons of ice, you can do something to compensate for that melting, and that assumes that you just understand the way the natural order works, that you can somehow plan it, and that somehow by giving some money to environmental charity, you're actually mitigating the fact that your flight has contributed to the melting of the ice cap. But I think it doesn't work like that, and it doesn't work like that for you. So what I'm saying is that if you feel that things are out of balance, and that one thing has perhaps been damaged, and that you can somehow sort it out in a very mechanistic way, you can't. You have to be organic about it, and you have to be able to just let go. And the balance, everything wants to go into balance anyway, and it's something very natural, and you can't find balance through your own conscious machinations. So Perhaps be more relaxed if you feel that things are out of sync, and don't be overly influenced by what is happening around you. Particularly, there seem to be sort of dark undercurrents that you are aware of, and that might be bothering you. And if you start asserting yourself in one way, in a way that you just feels natural, but it's not natural at all, that just puts you completely sort of out of sync. And so I think actually, Taurus, it's just a time, it's probably a day when you need to maybe just relax and not take anything too seriously, and allow things to develop in their own way. And that's probably the best approach. So yeah, don't feel pressured, and also you have to remember that Mercury is about to go retrograde, and you have got a lot of questions, and there are things you feel are just not entirely right, and you'd like to go deeper into them, but maybe you shouldn't beat yourself up about it. Just let things happen at their own pace, and I suppose that may be about tuning into the fundamentals of your own sign, tuning into Taurus. Taurus is the Earth, and it's about sort of respecting your role on this planet, and perhaps understanding that you're just another animal on this planet, and you just have to follow your instincts. I mean, not entirely follow your instincts, but just follow your instincts without getting too caught up in ideas and feeling what is right and wrong. I mean, obviously you've got to do what is right, but don't force it, and don't use your mind too much today, because I think your mind could be a little bit of a trap. Gemini, tomorrow Mercury goes stationary retrograde, or maybe it's today. If you're in the Americas, Mercury goes stationary retrograde today. If fairly late today, but it's still today. If you're not in the Americas, it's going to be tomorrow. So for a Gemini, that is an important event, and it does mean that things are slowing down. That it may feel as if things are slowing down almost to a standstill, and things you assumed were going to work out fine at a sort of a timely pace may not. So I suppose it's a time when you need to really plan accordingly. So for example, if you were expecting to do something in 3 hours, maybe it'll take 6 hours. And don't make plans unless it's really necessary, because plans, while Mercury is going stationary retrograde, just may not work out. It may all be rather disappointing. So just be prepared, but maybe also be aware of your strengths. Mercury is retrograde. Is about to go retrograde, but remember, it is in Sagittarius, which on the surface isn't great, because Mercury is in its detriment in Sagittarius, but Mercury is in mutual reception to Jupiter. So with Mercury in mutual reception to Jupiter, something is still looking after you. And so even if things do go a bit awry, in the end it can work out, provided you're flexible. And as a Gemini, you're quite capable of being flexible. Arguably, Gemini is the most flexible sign of all 12. And don't be too negative, and avoid negative thoughts, particularly if they relate to other people. And that is because Mercury is conjunct the fixed star Ras Al Hag, the snake charmer, the head of the snake charmer. And so, many Geminis might find themselves having quite dark ideas, and in terms of the various relationships you're in, you might not always see the other person in a positive light, and relationships could be under a little bit of pressure with Mercury conjunct Ras Al Hag. Mercury is already in Sagittarius, your opposite sign, so it's a very relationship-orientated Mercury at the moment, but conjunct Ras Al Hag, there's just a little bit of unpleasantness maybe creeping in. Now, that's not an inevitability. It doesn't have to be the case, but perhaps, Gemini, you need to be aware of your own capacity for unpleasantness and your capacity for having unpleasant thoughts. And, remember, I'm a Gemini, I've got my sun in Gemini, and, my thoughts can be as horrible as anyone else's. And so really make a special effort to have the right attitude, especially dealing with the people close to you. However much you care about them, however much you love them, you can still have some bad thoughts about them, and you can overinterpret their actions. So that's one thing going on. And also we've got the moon moving into Libra. So moon has been in Virgo, is moving into Libra. Okay, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon won't move into Libra until very late in the day. But with the moon moving into Libra, that does create the possibility of a little bit of balance. And the moon in Libra makes a sextile to the sun in Sagittarius. So I've talked about some of the issues you might have in relationships, which may to an extent be down to you, because you're perhaps having a lot of rather negative thoughts. But on the other hand, moon sextile sun is quite harmonious, and so there is always a possibility of harmony. So if you're having bad thoughts, try to move them, try to think about how you can create harmony. And harmony perhaps is about getting the right balance between what's important to you and what's important to other people. It needn't be a situation where if you do what matters to you, someone else suffers. If you do what's important for other people, then you suffer. It shouldn't be like that. And yes, it's very important, Gemini, that you are given creative, free self-expression. You've got to be free creatively. But that can have a cost, particularly if you get stubborn about your creativity. And that's something that Geminis can do. They can decide that something is really, really important. And so important that nothing else matters. And they have all sorts of reasons why it's important. They might say, well, it's important for me, my creativity. It might be financially important. It might be, I'm laying a foundation for the future. And you can get very precious about your creativity at the moment. But don't get too precious about it. It's not worth it. It's not worth upsetting other people too much just for the sake of your maybe creative arrogance. Maybe you're taking something too seriously and you need to get off your high horse. Maybe to an extent. Remember, I'm a Gemini. I'm talking to myself here as well, so I'm not singling you out. And consider also what's important to other people. What do other people want? What the important people in your life, what matters to them? What about their creativity? And that's something that Geminis can forget. That it's not that you're not the only person on this planet. And considering the other person and considering other person's creative needs is, I think, that's something you really can do, and I think it's something you should do. Cancer. Cancer, I think it's a relatively straightforward day. I don't think anything major is happening. Okay, there is a lunar sign change. The moon is moving Virgo from Virgo to Libra, and I think it's a time when Cancerians perhaps feel that their own privacy is important. You have wanted, to an extent, to keep things to yourself. I mean, I think that's been perhaps a growing trend over the last day, and I think with the moon moving into Libra, what you're looking for is balance, because Libra is a sign of balance, and so with moon moving into Libra, there is a sense of calm, or at least there should be calm, although when the moon moves into Libra, it does make a trine to Pluto, and that moon trine Pluto is potentially quite healthy. It's quite cathartic. There are things you need to work on which are perhaps quite private, and this is a reminder that Pluto really has changed sign. Pluto is no longer in Cancer; it's in Capricorn. Pluto is no longer in Capricorn; it's now in Aquarius, and so for Cancerians, Pluto moving into Aquarius is quite intense, and it's perhaps also about sort of verbalizing to yourself your own intensity and your own desire for transformation. But it is private. You're verbalizing it to yourself, not necessarily to other people. And with moon trine Pluto, you may feel that change is the right thing, that change can be something that you can really benefit from, and change is in many respects quite a private process. One thinks of, I don't know, the life cycle of, was it moths and butterflies and the chrysalis and all that kind of thing, which you have to have moments of quiet when you have to sort of retreat. And I suppose it's about, I suppose to an extent, it's about death and rebirth. I was actually picking invasive species in the country recently. It was September. It was the last days as summer turns to autumn, and I was looking at the praying mantises, and the praying mantises were very slow, and the praying mantises were dying. They'd done their bit, and you could see the eggs of the praying mantises. They were stuck to Scotch broom. I mean, Scotch broom is what I was trying to pull out, because Scotch broom is an invasive species, and I was trying to get rid of this Scotch broom. And you could see the eggs of a praying mantis. They've got a particular name, this egg sac, and the idea is basically this is what they do just before they die. They lay their eggs, and then they're gone, and then they can't handle the cold, and they don't last. They can't get through the winter. I mean, that's not going to happen to you, but maybe you feel a bit like that. You're sort of slowing down. You need to start to create the future, to create your future, and perhaps with the moon making a trine to Pluto. You don't need any help. You don't need any advice, and it's about doing what is necessary. And it's just perhaps a time when things do need to slow down over the next couple of days. And so, sure, I understand that in longer term there are things you absolutely have to do, that you do have to make your presence felt, but not at the moment, I don't think. So there might be pressures, not just from you, from yourself, not just from the outside world, but from you as well. Well, there might be an internal pressure, but I think it's okay to do what feels comfortable and not feel any pressure. And the moon is sextile the sun, and moon sextile sun it's a pleasant aspect. It is about harmony, and it's about you feeling connected with whatever you've chosen for yourself, and just quietly reconfiguring things, quietly just getting back in balance. That's fine. And really, Cancer, that's it. I think it's a day when you shouldn't allow yourself to feel pressurized. Leo, you are under a little bit of pressure at the moment, or at least you feel that you're under a fair amount of pressure. And the reason might be that you're starting to feel the quintile between Saturn and Uranus. So tomorrow, Tuesday, I think it's tomorrow, there is a quintile between Saturn. Sorry, it's actually Wednesday. I think it's Wednesday. So Wednesday there's a quintile between Saturn and Uranus. But I think that Saturn-Uranus quintile is actually starting to be felt, and I think you're starting to feel it. And the Saturn quintile Uranus is about a feeling of pressure, because Saturn is about restriction, it's about one's boundaries. Uranus is about revolution, overthrowing boundaries. So you're trying to be an individual, Uranus, but you're also trying to keep control of things. And with that Saturn quintile Uranus, that's the kind of image you're trying to create. And so you're asking yourself, how can you have an impact on the world, and how can you make sure that you're heard and your boundaries are respected? And then it's tough, and it may be that there's something about you at the moment that is almost deliberately creating tension. You feel that if everything was to be moving, if everything was to be flowing in a sort of a nice, harmonious way, you'd somehow feel uncomfortable. And, that might sound strange, but I suppose if everything were to be flowing, if everyone were to be happy, then people might get ignored. There's just a sameness about the thing. And so, Leo, you kind of want to stir things up. And I think that, you want to do it in almost quite a deliberate and planned way. So in the right situation, I think that could be something that you perhaps should be doing. But you do have to consider the consequences. I think that matters. And in this light, you need to think about what you're saying and what you're communicating. I think it is a time, Leo, where you feel that there are things you need to say, you want to say it, and actually through the things you say, you are actually trying to create change. You may not be aware of that, but I think actually that is what is happening. And especially with the fact that the moon is trine Pluto. So with the moon trine Pluto, you're perhaps very aware that you say something, and that can have a transformative impact. But is it a fortunate impact? I think if you say something without a plan, without a sort of fundamental ideology, not an ideology, but some sort of philosophical underpinning to it, then the question is why? What is the point? And so perhaps you have to make the effort to actually think about, Leo, what you actually believe in. What is important to you at the moment, and then decide how you should be communicating, what you should be saying, and what kind of changes you should be trying to create. So try to have some kind of philosophical underpinning to what you're doing and what you're saying, because if you don't have any philosophy, you don't have any reason, then you could be causing a lot of trouble for absolutely zero purpose. It's just trouble for the sake of trouble. And what then one might just ask, why? Well, deep down it might be that you just feel a set of you feel a certain inner tension, and the inner tension has to be somehow released, and you release that tension, and other people get tense, and it just could create a lot of problems. So I think in that sense, it's important that you exercise some responsibility. But on the plus side, we have got a sextile aspect between the moon and the sun. The sun is, of course, your ruler. And the moon sextile the sun is perhaps telling you how you should be occurring to the rest of the world. Moon sextile sun is quite a harmonious aspect. And it perhaps is a situation where what you should be doing is trying to support everyone, including yourself, in terms of, I suppose, their creative self-expression, allowing people to be themselves and not trying to limit them. And I think that that's something you actually can do. And so you kind of have to resist the temptation, and don't feel that you have to be the star. Don't feel that you have to be the center of attention. Maybe it's all about facilitating other people. And if you can facilitate other people, then in the end you'll be facilitating yourself. And with this moon sextile sun, I think that handled in the right way, I think it can actually be very good in terms of fostering relationships, making people feel happier, making you and other people more comfortable in each other's company. And so I've used this word harmony quite a lot with moon sextile sun, and perhaps that is something you actually can find, that everyone can be on the right wavelength. And then, Leo, you might just feel centered, you might feel that you have a sort of a sense of purpose, and perhaps some of the underlying tension that's been sort of building up recently may start to dissipate. Virgo. So Virgo, Mercury is about to go retrograde. It goes retrograde. Well, it depends. It depends where you are. This evening, if you're in the Americas. Tomorrow, if you're in Europe, Asia, Australasia. But one way or another, Mercury is coming to a standstill, and because Mercury is your ruler, this matters, and so it might feel perhaps that things are slowing down. And you may also be having a few second thoughts. So certain thoughts, were about how you planned everything, how you'd organize things, and everything seemed to be fine. But now, you are having questions. And these questions may continue over the next few weeks. So perhaps, Virgo, you shouldn't be necessarily committing yourself to a firm, absolute set of plans. You do need to allow for the possibility of change, and so don't assume that just everything is going to go your way. And that can be a Virgo thing. Virgos like everything to be sorted out. I mean, I know I don't want to get accused of stereotyping Virgos, but one aspect of Virgo is wanting to make sure that all the details are in order. It doesn't apply for every Virgo, but it can be the case. But the trouble is that if you create a plan which is too tight, then it may not be able to handle the kind of pressures that Mercury going retrograde are going to place on it, because Mercury going retrograde can often create new information and new scenarios. And if your plan is too fixed, has no scope for change, then the plan might just collapse, and you'd either have to abandon anything, abandon whatever you were planning on doing, or you might have to create a new plan, and time is passing, and that's perhaps not what you want to do. And also, Virgo, it's important not to blame people. I mean, I think you could blame people at the moment, not just today, but as Mercury is stationary retrograde. That means, from the Earth's perspective, Mercury has come to a standstill, and Mercury has come to a standstill conjunct the fixed star Ras Al Hag, and Ras Al Hag can be about having quite a lot of negative thoughts, and those negative thoughts could well relate to other people, and you might be in the mood for sort of blaming them, or there could be recriminations if things don't go to plan. And I do think that is something to avoid, and it's perhaps also a time, Virgo, when you do need to look a little beyond surface details. It's easy to make judgments on the basis of what people are doing on the surface, but actually it's a time, Virgo, when you should be trying your hardest to sort of get to the bottom of things, and perhaps understanding the motivation behind the motivation, even behind the motivation. Things are not as simple as they seem, and the question is, if things are complex, how do you actually untangle them? Well, you can untangle them simply by being very direct. You are direct, and if you are direct, you are super direct, then it's possible that you can cut through several layers of complication in one fell swoop. And I suppose, well, you could say it's like cutting a Gordian knot, isn't it? Maybe that's it. The Gordian knot, as I understand it, the knot is this incredibly complicated knot that it's just impossible to untangle. And I think that sort of Alexander the Great was confronted with the Gordian knot, and so the best way to untangle the Gordian knot is not necessarily to spend ages and ages untangling it. It's just to take a sword and cut it in half. That may be the approach, and that might be something you need to do. If something is bothering you, something seems to be just too complicated, that might be actually the right approach. And also, Virgo, you do have at the moment quite a powerful set of ideals, things that you would really like to happen, even though I've just talked about Mercury about to go retrograde, and it does make things difficult, and you are quite questioning, and you might sort of think that certain things are not possible. Still, deep down, there is an idealism to you. You're idealistic, perhaps in a spiritual sense. Perhaps you're idealistic about the way society can be, and you haven't lost that, and you're not losing that. And so maybe that's what you need to focus on. I mean, it's not the whole thing, but perhaps you should consider what actually might be possible. And I think you might find that more things are possible than you actually realize. If you just give yourself the chance. And I think that's going to be hard for you, but just hold on to it. And so perhaps over the next 3 weeks, just hold on to what is really special, to some belief that you have. Even if short term it may seem that there's no chance of that belief ever working out, it might just seem hopeless, it might seem a fantasy, but if you keep holding on to it and you keep telling yourself it's possible, then you might find that over the next few weeks, perhaps as you move into, as you move through into sort of mid-December, you might start to realize that something is possible that you almost gave up on. So don't allow your idealism to go out of a window with Mercury going retrograde, because there is something that I think is very important that you hold on to, that is really special to you. And in fact, by reworking some of your ideas and looking at things again, you might actually find in the end that there's a chance of realizing your dreams. It might actually be possible, but perhaps not in the way you had originally imagined. Libra. The moon is starting to move into your sign. Okay, when it moves into your sign, that is to some extent dependent on where you are. So, if you're in the Americas, the moon will move into Libra, very early this morning. If you're in Australasia, it will be very late in the day. So it kind of depends, but the moon is moving into Libra, and I think that in many respects, that is a good thing. When the moon was in Virgo, you perhaps felt that you weren't fully yourself, that you weren't really able to, spread your wings, that you had to kind of observe, but it wasn't the time for taking action. Perhaps there were just too many things to think about, or perhaps you had certain concerns. But now the moon is moving into Libra, you're feeling yourself, and the moon, when it moves into Libra, it makes a trine to Pluto, and it makes a sextile to the sun, and that moon trine Pluto is really, really nice. I think moon trine Pluto. I mean, it's not a square. It hasn't got the drama of a square or an opposition or a conjunction. But trine is perhaps a time when you can start to change things, but in your own way. There isn't the pressure. So it may just be a case of you can if you want, but you don't have to. So if you're not happy with the way things are and you can be bothered to change them, then I think you can. But if you want to leave it, that's up to you. And the moon is also making a sextile to the sun, and I think that with that moon sextile sun, I think it's easy for you to explain yourself, and people understand you, and in general, you're a force for good. Wherever you are, you can create a sense of peace and togetherness, and I think that in most cases, you're not going to rock the boat. So that's all very pleasant. Though we should notice that the moon is making a conjunction to the south node, and the moon making a conjunction to the south node, okay, the conjunction between the south node might not be exact today, it might be more about tomorrow, but the point is the moon and the south node are getting closer, and that does suggest, Libra, that you could have too much of a good thing. In other words, if everything is fine, and if everyone is happy with each other, and everyone is perhaps cooperating at some level, that's easy, might feel job done, but it just may be that something is being forgotten. It just might be too easy. If things are too easy, then that kind of indicates that something is wrong, or that something is perhaps being neglected, and maybe you know what it is. Maybe it's a situation where you should be saying something or doing something which may be ever so slightly controversial. It may be very controversial, and other people might not like it. Or at least you think that other people might not like it. Or perhaps you'll be afraid of other people's reaction. So I think, Libra, it might be a good idea to be a little more adventurous. Not adventurous for the sake of it, because I think actually, Libra, there's something you actually know you should be doing, and I think it's something assertive, but you're just afraid of the consequence, and so you need to work out what that is. And if you find yourself enjoying yourself, if everything is running smoothly, no worries, no fears, then maybe there's actually something you're missing. And also, if you just go with the flow, which I think at some level you're going to want to do, you might get yourself into a situation that you hadn't really thought about, and you may quite naturally go somewhere that is, I won't say dangerous, but somewhat nebulous, and it's not kind of where you intended. And I suppose it's like, I don't know, it's like sort of going down a river. You're going down this river very fast, and it's all running smooth, but not too fast, and you're not really paying attention, and then you sort of feel things are slowing down, but you don't really care about it, and then suddenly you find yourself in a backwater. You're out of that river, and it's, I don't know, somewhere with dark overhanging trees, and it's somewhere that feels somewhat unfamiliar, and it's happened because you weren't paying attention. And so maybe you do need to pay attention, and you do need to to take control of where you're going, because if you lose control because it seems easiest, you might sort of stray into places that you really didn't want to stray into. So it's all very well to say go with the flow, but if you go with the flow without thinking, and you lose sort of conscious awareness, the flow could take you into some very strange places, and these are strange places that you don't necessarily want to go into. But Libra, I'm probably being somewhat melodramatic. Another thing I should point out is that Mercury is going stationary retrograde, and so with Mercury going stationary retrograde over the next couple of days, I would have said, be careful what you commit to, be careful what you promise to, because things change. So what it feels like today may not be what it is tomorrow. So you might say something today, perhaps, and you're doing it on a certain basis, on making certain assumptions, but those assumptions might change. What you thought was the case is not necessarily the case. And so the trouble about making a promise is you're basically making a promise on making on the basis of assumptions that are simply not true. So I would suggest that you avoid making commitments today, because Mercury going stationary retrograde could change everything, and you may have to go back on your word, or you may have to do something that you didn't really want to do because you overpromised, or you weren't thoughtful enough. So I think today overall, Libra, you have to be aware, and you have to be aware of what your conscience is telling you. There may be certain things you have to do, like that may be necessary to assert yourself, and you don't really want to assert yourself, but also don't just go with the flow, because I think the flow is not necessarily taking you where you want to go. Scorpio, you don't necessarily have to do anything at the moment. I don't think you kind of want to. I think you're quite into yourself right now, and I think that you believe that you know what's right for yourself, but in terms of beyond things that are outside your own control, you don't know. And as far as you're concerned, you don't want to stray beyond your own realm of knowledge and experience. And you might get a bit of criticism for that. You might feel outside pressure. But I think that that is actually the right approach. So do things your way, and also respect your own ability to stand up for yourself, because actually at the moment you can stand up for yourself, but at first you might not think you can. And don't forget that the sun is making a trine to Mars. So over the next couple of days, the sun is trine Mars, and so Mars is your ruler. Sun is making a trine to Mars, and Sun trine Mars can be, very stubborn. You want to do things your way. You know where you're powerful. You know where you're weak, and so you can make that distinction. And that's why, going back to what I was saying at the beginning of this piece on Scorpio, is there's nothing you have to do. Don't feel pressured. Certainly don't do what other people tell you what to do, unless they, I suppose there's always a situation where you have to do what you're told, but most cases I think that you should trust your own instincts, and if something doesn't feel right, don't do it. But also understand that if something does feel right, then you really can make things happen, because the sun is starting to make this trine, and over the next couple of days, I think the trine will get stronger, and I think that you'll have no problems asserting yourself, and you'll have a clear sense of what you should be doing, and what is right for you. And I think the impact of other people, I think other people could just make it worse, or make it, or in fact, they could be a spoiler. So you actually know how things should be going. You understand that, but other people could just be a recipe at least for chaos. And you give people the opportunity to make decisions, to influence your life. It doesn't help. Things just start to drift. You're waiting for someone. They may deliver, they may not deliver. They probably won't deliver, because Mercury is about to go stationary retrograde. So Scorpio, that means it's just so important that you are in control. You're making your own decisions. You don't need to be in a high-profile environment. In a way, you are the center. You should regard yourself as being in the center of things. So when you think about adopting a high profile, one often thinks about adopting a high profile as having to go somewhere, to take some social initiative in order to have that high profile. But it's actually quite possible that you have that high profile where you are. You are where the action is. You are where it's happening. And it doesn't really matter if there's no one else around, because you are the center of the universe. Of course, you're not the center of the universe, but it might be a good idea to treat yourself to an extent as the center of the universe. I don't want to encourage you to be hubristic at all, no. But you can go about centering yourself in a quite a meticulous way. And I think you are going to be quite rigorous over the course of the day. And perhaps that's another reason why you don't need anyone else around you, or you don't need many people around you, because when you've got lots of people around you, they just create chaos, as I've just said. And you know how things should be done, and I don't think you need anyone else's help or advice. So in that sense, you could say that it's quite a Scorpio day, when Scorpio needs to really respect its own power, although I suppose as far as relationships are concerned, it may not be your first priority, but at the same time, I think it's possible that there's just something about you that's sort of interesting and might appear to an outsider to be quite quirky. And so as a result, you might seem to be sort of quite a fascinating proposition. It's clearly obvious that you've got something to offer, that there's something about you that is really interesting, and I think people are going to want to know more. And there's just this sense that perhaps in relationships there could be pleasant surprises. That's possible. I mean, I don't know who's going to be springing the pleasant surprises, but I suppose with relationships, with 12 sign astrology, I've always got to mention relationships, haven't I? Or at least try to mention relationships, even if relationships aren't a priority. I think it's almost expected of me. So if relationships are important to you, then I think that your own individualism and your own particular approach could, to some people, actually be quite attractive. Sagittarius, it's perhaps quite a happening day. Certainly things going on. I've been talking about the fact that the Sun is making a trine to Mars. I've been talking about that before. And so the Sun is getting closer and closer to a trine to Mars. I mean, the Sun trine Mars, I think, is exact on Wednesday, so it's a couple of days away. But I think that you're starting to feel the influence of that aspect. So just remember that is Sun in Sagittarius, trine Mars in Leo, and so that Sun trine Mars is very exciting, I think, and it's very stimulating, and you feel that you can make things happen. And it is, after all, the Sagittarius season. Sun is moving through early Sagittarius, and with that trine to Mars, you don't have to be satisfied with second best. If things are boring, are not providing sufficient stimulation, you can move on, or you can at least make things happen, and that's something you very, very much can do. I think it's going to actually be very easy for you to make things happen, and I think that you're helped also by the fact that the Moon is moving into Libra, and with the Moon moving into Libra, it makes a sextile to the Sun, and sort of late in the day, or perhaps into tomorrow, the Moon makes a sextile to Mars. So you could say that the Moon is on the Sun-Mars midpoint. So that is very positive, and I think that you can really enjoy other people's company with the Moon moving into Libra. But don't enjoy people's company too much, because at the moment, Sagittarius, you are someone who has got certainly a huge amount to offer, but you have a way of doing things which is very unique to you. And if you spend too much time worrying about other people and other people's demands, you could actually start to water yourself down. So, by all means, enjoy people's company, but not too much. Certainly not if you're making any effort to accommodate. It's not a day for accommodating. If you find yourself having to alter your schedule because someone else wants you to, or you find yourself toning down what you say because you're afraid that you might get a negative reaction, then I think something's wrong. So other people are there to support you. You are not necessarily there to support them. Okay, you can support them through the power of your personality, but the power of your personality cannot be compromised and it cannot be diluted. So in a way, your social life can take place. It can work very well, but it always has to be on your terms. I think that is very important. And on the theme of relationships, you need to bear in mind that Mercury is about to go retrograde, and that might suggest that you can't rely on people, not as much as you thought you could. People might change their minds. You might have made assumptions about other people being prepared to help you, or being useful. They may have made promises. I would take people's assurances and promises at the moment with a pinch of salt. Don't be surprised if they let you down. Not saying they're going to let you down today, but if they could let you down over the next few weeks. And if anyone does let you down, I would suggest that you don't take it personally. I think that perhaps people made commitments in good faith, but things happened and they just can't keep their promises, so that is possible. And if you are absolutely relying on someone over the next few weeks, then perhaps you need to really check, really make absolutely sure that they are committed. Because if you ask enough questions and you really try to get a commitment out of someone, a firm commitment, and I suppose in extreme cases you might want to back it up with some kind of contract, depending on what it is about, you might realize that people aren't really able to deliver. And don't hold it against them, and allow people to change their minds. And I think that that's particularly the case in terms of relationships. If you're in a relationship with someone, and you're trying to get them to do something, and maybe they said it's fine, but if they want to change their mind, then and perhaps they want to change their mind several times, that's fine. Don't hold it against them. And it's also important that you don't try to force people to make commitments, because if you try to force people to make commitments, they might well make commitments, but that in itself is not enough. Are they actually able to honor their commitments? And the answer in many cases might be no. Though on the plus side, with Mercury making a mutual reception to Jupiter, I think that it is a time when you can be very supportive. You can be supportive of people who may let you down. They may have let you down, but perhaps you can support people and help them make the right decision. And decisions can take a long time, and it may not be for a few weeks before people are ready to make commitments. So Sagittarius, just understand that all. And as far as today is concerned, things are moving, and I think that there is a great flow, and you are special, and it's not a time to be compromising who you are and compromising your plans and your ideas. And and in the end, you don't need anyone's help. You can be quite self-sufficient, and you can do things that are completely wonderful. You can do them on your own. If you get company, well, so much the better, but it's not necessary. Capricorn, you're perhaps starting to become aware that there are things that need to be done, and perhaps it's even the time to get moving on them. Now, that might sound like a strange thing to say, given the fact that Mercury is about to go retrograde. So the problem with Mercury going retrograde is that very often things just don't work out, and so you might think that with Mercury about to go retrograde, now is not the time to get things moving. And I think that for most people that might actually be the case, but maybe for you at the moment it might be okay. You've been sort of procrastinating, I think, a lot recently, and you have had a certain sense that things are not working always in your favor. And I don't think you've been helped by the fact that the sun has just moved into Sagittarius. But you can't avoid the sun moving into Sagittarius, and as you know, the sun will eventually move into Capricorn. But whenever 22nd of December, about then. When does the sun move into Capricorn? The sun moves into Capricorn at Sun moves into Capricorn. Yeah, it moves on the 21st of December, 9:20 London time. So 21st of December, Sun moves into Capricorn. So that is certainly something to be looking forward to. And right now, there's something you need to start, I think. You may not be able to finish it. You may have to postpone it halfway through, but I think that you are perhaps staking your claim. You're saying, well, you're staking your claim not just in terms of how other people respond to this, but it's also how you respond. You are reminding yourself that it is, to an extent, a new beginning, a new beginning which you know is not perfect. You know that in a few weeks' time you're going to have to change things, but you just feel that it's time to make a statement of intent. And yes, there is going to be a new moon on December the 1st, and Mercury is going to be retrograde, and so that statement of intent may have to be altered, but I think now is the time to at least tell yourself that things have changed. And indeed, you could be preparing for the Capricorn season. I mean, it may seem a long way away, but I suppose Venus is already in Capricorn, and Sun sooner or later will move into Capricorn. Yes, Mercury will move into Capricorn. So it's about to happen. And so you can also tell people how you feel and what your opinions are. You'll be very clear about this, Capricorn. You won't talk too much, but you will say enough. And I think that people will understand you, and that might be something you're doing that is kind of an investment for the future. By making your position clear now, it will be remembered maybe in a few weeks' time. And another thing about making a start now is that by making a start now, you may very quickly become aware of what you don't have and why some of your ambitions may not be entirely workable at first, but you'll then realize what you need. And I think that you'll know what you need, and that will give you the impetus to start bringing together all the things that you require. So I think it's a process of preparation, and I think it's a long process of preparation, and I think that you're almost thinking ahead here to Christmas, maybe to the beginning of the new year, but you've got to start somewhere, and I think Capricorn now is a good place to make that start. Aquarius, we have the moon moving into Libra, and the moon in Libra makes a sextile to the sun, and it makes a trine to Pluto. So moon sextile sun, moon trine Pluto, I think is pretty good for you. It is a reminder, of course, that Pluto is now in Aquarius, and Pluto's going to stay in Aquarius, I think, until 2043 or something like that. Is it March 12, 2043? I don't know. It's, that kind of time frame. So it's at 18 years, and so there's a reminder that something has changed. And this in fact is the first time that the moon has trine Pluto when it's been in Aquarius in its final phase. Okay, the moon has trine Pluto in Aquarius over the last year or two on and off, I think, but this trine Pluto it's just a reminder that something has started, that things have changed. And with this moon trine Pluto, you perhaps get a sense of purpose. I mean, you should be having a sense of purpose, but not a purpose in any sort of mundane kind of way. It's a sense that you have a set of ideas. Ideas are important to you, and perhaps you should be living your life according to a set of ideas. And it's also a set of expanding ideas, because with moon in Libra is perhaps encouraging you to look at things from the highest level, not to worry too much about little details, just to have the big idea. And big ideas are great, I mean, particularly if you're an Aquarius, but big ideas sometimes do need to be supported. And so don't be afraid, Aquarius, of asking yourself questions. So, if something seems good in a broad sense, but there seem to be a few examples of contradictions, then ask some questions. Again, ask questions of yourself. And this might be, with the moon trine Pluto, a process by which ideas can change, and ideas can change, I suppose, through conversation. So you might find that it's relatively easy to talk to people, talk to people about what you believe in, get them to give you feedback, and don't be afraid of being corrected. If you find you're corrected or you're questioned, someone maybe suggests that you're not making sense, don't take it personally. I think that it's important that you are consistent, and there just may be a few aspects of some of your ideas which are inconsistent, and maybe it's a good time for those inconsistencies to be ironed out. And continuing on the theme of relationships, we shouldn't forget that the Sun is making a trine to Mars. The Sun trine Mars is exact on Wednesday, but you're feeling the growing influence of this aspect, and the Sun trine Mars may represent outside dynamism. You might think that you're dynamic, but you're not the most dynamic person on the planet right now. There are other people and other situations that are more dynamic than you, that have got more energy. And I think it's important that you're not threatened. I mean, you might feel threatened by this because you might feel it's just too much effort having to deal with dynamic people, dynamic situations, where there's a strong sense of purpose. That might not be what you want. But with Sun trine Mars, I think that there may be a way to benefit, because you're being shown something else. You're being shown a different approach. And, in terms of relationships with the Sun trine Mars over the next few days, you might find that the people around you, particularly the people you know well, people you spend a lot of time with, could have a lot more energy than usual. And you mustn't be threatened by this energy, and you mustn't try to restrict this energy. No, that's not what it's about. You need to support this energy and perhaps even be carried along by it, because energetic people right now should be welcomed, and their energy can become your energy, even though Mercury is moving retrograde. We know perhaps Mercury is about to go retrograde, but we don't want to exaggerate it too much. Life goes on when Mercury is retrograde, and even if with Mercury retrograde, plans might be changing, there might be delays, whatever, there's still a place for a dynamic, fiery approach, and that can be supported. And that fire is not coming from you, I don't think. I think it's coming from outside, and I think that that's something that I think, Aquarius, you should be welcoming. Pisces, you possibly feel that there are things going on which are a little complicated, that you don't fully understand, and if something doesn't make sense, you possibly want to stay away from it. I mean, that is an approach. You could say, it's too complicated, I don't want to know about it. That is an approach. Or you could just be trying to get through the complications. Things are perhaps complicated on the surface. Maybe the more people talk about them, or the more you talk about them, the more complicated they seem, when in actual fact things might actually be very straightforward. Though it does seem, Pisces, that there's a certain tendency to take things a little bit seriously, to think about them too much. And this might prevent you from, for example, saying everything that's on your mind, and you might just keep things back. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily the right approach. I mean, there are some things that you do have to keep secret, but they're important to you. You don't want to tell everyone, but at the same time, just don't make things too complicated. I think that is important, and don't think too much. I think the trouble about thinking too much is that if you think too much, then you might reach a stage where you are starting to worry too much, and you might then convince yourself that nothing is possible. So a little bit of positivity, I think, would be useful, and perhaps you can take advantage of the fact that the Sun is trine Mars, and the Sun is in Sagittarius. It's trine Mars. I think I've mentioned this recently, and over the next couple of days, this trine between the Sun and the Mars is getting stronger, and the Sun is in Sagittarius, and the Sun is, I think, quite a motivator, and so you need to perhaps cut through your own negativity, and maybe actually you need to see evidence. Maybe evidence is quite important. You need to see evidence that something is working, and until you see evidence, you're going to take the view that it's not possible. So that is an approach, and so be open-minded, and let other people work whatever magic they have. I mean, other people, sure, they're not entirely confident all the time, particularly as Mercury is going stationary retrograde. But I just think that there are certain people, in spite of Mercury going retrograde, who are confident, who do have something to give, and you should kind of listen to what they have to say. I mean, I suppose, remember that Mercury is in mutual reception to Jupiter, and Mercury and Jupiter are in each other's sign, and so maybe you need to give people a chance, and not take things too seriously. And I think that's the main thing going on. I mean, I suppose on a positive note, there are things that you can really get to grips with and you can understand. If you're prepared to concentrate today on one thing and really make a special effort to gather as much information as possible as you can about it and not to be distracted, then I think that you might actually make some breakthroughs. It's hard work, and it may be you have to spend 6 hours just focusing on one thing and nothing else, and it seems to be to you that it's a complete waste of time, that you're getting nowhere, and it just becomes more and more difficult, more and more like sort of sludge, and then suddenly there comes a moment where things start making clear and your work will have paid off. So those are the 12 signs, and now I want to look at today, Monday, November the 25th, from a viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 41, which is decrease. Now, decrease is a hexagram which is kind of in contrast to increase. Increase, decrease. There's always that issue. If you want to increase, you need to decrease. If you give up something, then you get something back in return. And with decrease, there seems to be a sense in which we're trying to, or should be trying to, reduce ourselves, reduce what we have, reduce our focus, perhaps trying to be more economical. Maybe we've just been going in too many different directions, and we need to make things simpler. And perhaps something needs to be given up. Maybe as Mercury starts to go retrograde, something perhaps that has been important to us, as we know that it's no longer serving any useful purpose. We're still attached to it, but it's possibly a good time to let go with decrease. And the general advice with decrease here is just to keep a fairly low profile. There's nothing that we have to be doing, at least in a dramatic sense. And the concepts of fast advance, that's I think not going to be possible. And again, that's kind of quite reasonable given that Mercury is pretty much stationary retrograde. And we do have a moving line. The bottom line moves, and the bottom line seems to be about our relationship to other people and where the balance lies. It seems that there is a certain obligation to try to increase other people, to do things to help others. But we have to get the balance right. If we go too far to help other people, then we're not helping ourselves. And indeed, we may be not helping anyone, because if we exhaust ourselves or we expend too many resources, then we have nothing left to offer. So we do need to get that balance right. And that's probably all there is to be said about decrease. It's not yielding, as far as I can see, a lot of information. But with that first line moving, it means we do transition to a different hexagram. And the hexagram it moves to is hexagram 4, which is youthful folly. And there seems to be a warning here. It seems that we try to get the balance right. We try to help other people. We try to look after our own interests. We might feel, okay, we can keep a low profile. But in the end, we may still feel that we mess it up because it's youthful folly. We do something that we know is wrong, what we know doesn't work out, and we almost can't help ourselves. And so something just something from the past, something we thought we'd grown out of, because it's youthful folly. It doesn't matter how old we are, we can still be a victim of our own youthful folly. Perhaps it's just a situation that we were not really familiar with, and we make a mistake. So I would have said today, given everything, it's probably not a time to actually be doing anything. It seems that we try our hardest. We perhaps try to be all things to all people, and we satisfy no one, and we certainly don't satisfy ourselves. And we might end the day just feeling that we kind of made a mistake here. It didn't work, and we should have known, but we didn't know. So that means today you have to be careful. Well, if I say do nothing today, then that might itself be a mistake. So do consider your own capacity for messing up. And if you get into a situation where you know you've messed up before, try to remember, have you been in this situation before? Perhaps you have. Perhaps you've even got advice on it, because one of the things about youthful folly is it's saying, that the I Ching is saying, the young fool asked me once, asked me twice, asked me, this is the third time. The young fool keeps asking me the question. I always give the same answer, but the fool doesn't recognize this answer. So that might be about it. It's something like it's a mistake, but you don't want to know it's a mistake. You're not prepared to listen, and so be prepared to listen. And listening, that might be just about listening to yourself. Fundamentally, you know how to avoid making a mistake, but it just might be that you make a mistake anyway. But it's not inevitable. I think there is something you can do about it, and it has a lot to do with the balance, I think, between you and other people, and how much you're giving, and not giving too much, not giving too little, getting that balance right. So it's it's a bit complex. I don't think we're not talking about anything catastrophic, but it could be a somewhat difficult day and a somewhat confusing day where it could be actually quite difficult to do the right thing. And so today we have, or could be tomorrow, we have Mercury going stationary retrograde. And that's what I want to look at in this last part of the video. So let's start by looking at the chart of Mercury retrograde. So here is the precise moment that Mercury goes retrograde London time. It's 2:41 a.m. on November the 26th. So that means that if you're in the Americas, Mercury will go retrograde on Monday evening. So, I mean, I could have done a Mercury retrograde video on Tuesday. I could have done it today, Monday. I decided today, Monday. Well, I suppose I might as well give a little bit of warning so people sort of know what to have an idea perhaps about what to expect. Now, with Mercury retrograde, we say the normal things, don't we? We say that when Mercury goes retrograde, things don't go to plan. We might find there are delays, particularly delays regarding the spoken word, the written word, things getting misunderstood. We send someone a message and we assume they're going to read the message. They don't read the message, or they don't understand the message. So, if you are communicating not just now but over the next 3 weeks and you send someone an email, don't assume they've read it. Don't assume they've understood it. So it's perhaps telling us to make sure that we have communicated in several different ways. Maybe an email is not enough. Maybe a text message is not enough. We perhaps have to talk to them as well. Maybe we should communicate. If a message is important, perhaps it needs to be communicated in 3 independent ways with Mercury going retrograde. So that's one aspect of Mercury retrograde. There is also the question of how long does it last. So Mercury goes retrograde at 2240 Sagittarius. So, first thing is, when does Mercury stop going retrograde? When does it go stationary direct? Well, it goes stationary direct in 3 weeks' time, and it goes stationary direct on I think the 15th of December. So that's the first point to be aware of. So 15th of December, it goes direct. That is, if you want a time. I mean, not that we should be really too concerned about times at the moment, but yeah, Mercury goes stationary direct at just before 9 in the evening on Sunday the 15th, so on London time. So if you're in the Americas, if you're in Europe, it goes stationary direct on the 15th, the 16th, if you're in parts of Asia, Australasia. So that might be the first time to think about. Then there's a question is, how long does the whole movement last for? So Mercury goes as far as 2240 Sagittarius. And there is a view that Mercury doesn't really finish its whole movement until it goes on to where it's to the starting point. So Mercury is at 22 degrees 40 Sagittarius. It goes stationary retrograde. It goes back to 6 degrees Sagittarius. Then it goes stationary direct on December the 15th. But the day it returns to 2240 Sagittarius, when the whole movement is over, is on, I think it's 2240 on the 2nd or 3rd of January. So the whole movement is not really over until the 2nd or 3rd of January. But as far as how we should see Mercury retrograde in terms of specifics, we need to focus on that precise moment where Mercury is retrograde. And the fact that it is retrograde on 2240 Sagittarius, we already know that Sagittarius, that at that point there is this fixed star, Ras Al Hag, and Ras Al Hag, the head of the snake charmer, is not a particularly easy star. I mean, if you look at what, and I've looked at this before, but let's have another look at Ras Al Hag and what Vivian Robson says about Ras Al Hag. He sees it as being, when describing Ras Al Hag, he says that it gives misfortune through women, perverted tastes, and mental depravity. I mean, that's perhaps a bit of an exaggeration, but the indication is that it is not necessarily a fortunate star. And as on Mercury, with Mercury, he says unpopular attitude and criticism through religion, philosophy, or science, difficulties in marriage and quarrels fostered by others, trouble through opposite sex, not very good for gain. Okay, you can take some of that with a pinch of salt, maybe, but you just get an idea that it is about difficult feelings, perhaps difficult emotions. Relationships may be under pressure, not just relationships between people, but relationships between countries. And I suppose if you think about the snake charmer, the head of the snake charmer, I suppose if one thinks about it, the snake charmer is trying to be in control of something really quite dangerous. I mean, that's the whole thing about snake charmer, isn't it? The head of the snake charmer, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but the head of the snake charmer, here's a snake charmer who thinks he's in control, and there's the head, there's the brain, he's trying to work out how to deal with this snake, and it is a snake, and I suppose things can go wrong. He thinks he can anticipate what this snake is going to do, and particularly with Mercury, Mercury thinks it can deal with it, but maybe not. The snake may in the end be a law unto itself. It may do something when one wasn't expecting. And so if you're playing games with snakes, for example, if you're playing games with, Russian red lines, for example, maybe that's not such a good thing to be doing. Maybe NATO thinks it can be a snake charmer, thinks it can deal with the snake, but maybe it can't, maybe not. That could be one interpretation. Now, what about Mercury, and how do we actually see what Mercury is about? And aside from being on conjunct Ras Al Hag, Mercury on the surface doesn't seem to be doing too much. It's kind of square Neptune, but it'll be moving away from Neptune. I mean, that Mercury square Neptune is, it's nearly 5 degrees. What is it? 4.5 degrees. So I suppose you could say Mercury square Neptune. There's a bit of a sense of just not being quite sure what it's doing. I mean, that's one possibility. Assuming too much, perhaps having too much hope. And it might be a good idea then to look at the 90-degree dial. So the 90-degree dial gives us an idea perhaps about what Mercury is doing. And the 90-degree dial is actually not particularly dramatic. You've got, at least in terms of Mercury, there are other things going on in this 90-degree dial, which I'm certainly going to be thinking about, which are dramatic. But Mercury you can see, is on the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint. And so this may say something about what Mercury going stationary retrograde is actually about. So Mercury, Jupiter-Neptune as a pair are about hopes. Jupiter is optimistic, and Neptune is about fantasy. We can be perhaps optimistic about things which maybe have no chance of actually working out. That is a possibility. Just being too optimistic, taking that optimism too far, believing that things are going to work out fine, when Yeah, maybe they're not. On a plus side, though, Mercury on a Jupiter-Neptune midpoint is quite spiritual. Jupiter-Neptune can be connected with religion, sort of becoming part of something which is beyond us. And so, from a spiritual perspective, if we engage in sort of spiritual practices or meditation or whatever we feel we need to do religiously or spiritually, I think that we can get a lot of satisfaction here with this. And maybe we are able to get in touch with something numinous, supernatural, or at least we're going to think that is the case. Of course, with Jupiter Neptune, there's always a little bit of a possibility of deception there. So that's Mercury in terms of midpoints. Sounds good, but there are two things about this chart that I kind of find interesting and perhaps concerning, and that is the Anticia points. So the Anticia point is when you reflect a planet in the 0 degrees Cancer, 0 degrees Capricorn axis. In other words, the solstice points, because the sun is the northern hemisphere, the summer solstice is at 0 degrees when the sun is at 0 degrees Cancer. Winter solstice is when the sun is at 0 degrees Capricorn. So we do have the solstice axis. And so if we look at Mercury in terms of the solstice point, so if you reflect Mercury in if you reflect Mercury in 0 degrees Capricorn, you get to 7 degrees 20. You get to 7 degrees 20. So 7 degrees 20 is the Anticia point of Mercury, and the moon is exactly semi-square at that point. So Mercury and the moon are effectively, well, the moon is aspecting Mercury's Anticia, so we can say that Mercury is aspecting, so the moon is aspecting by square the Anticia of Mercury. So there is a moon-Mercury relationship here. Or you could use midpoints to say the Aries point is square the moon-Mercury midpoint. And I mean, you could see that as supporting the spirituality of the thing. Moon-Mercury it is a time when we perhaps are able to communicate, even though Mercury is retrograde, and that's kind of quite pleasant. But then there's another Anticia point, which is much more concerning. And this goes beyond the fact that Mercury is retrograde and turning retrograde. And this is Mars and Uranus. So you can see that the Uranus there's 0 degrees Cancer. And so Uranus, the Anticia of Uranus is at 5 degrees 8 Leo. So Mars is on 5 degrees 25 Leo. So Mars and Uranus are on each other's Anticia. And we will see this again, because Mars is going to go retrograde on December the 6th at 6 degrees 10 Leo. Then it will go retrograde and it will go back onto the Anticia. So you could say that we've got a running issue here with Mars and Uranus being on the Anticia, on their Anticia. So it's not just a one-off. So, and this is in a way made stronger by the fact that it's happening while it's very close, while Mercury is stationary direct. But I think that Mars-Uranus on each other's Anticia is a reminder that this is an incredibly difficult period of time for the world. Mars and Uranus as a pairing are about violence, are about warfare, about the use of weapons, whether they be ICBMs or ATACMS or storm shadows, whatever. It's violent, it's warlike, and here we have the US, France, Britain really trying to stir things up in the Ukraine with Mars and Uranus on each other's Anticia, and we can see this on the going back to the dial. See, if we put the Aries point on, if we put 0 degrees Aries on the dial, we can see, you see, there is Mars and Uranus. In fact, there's a sort of not just Mars and Uranus, the hypothetical planet Vulcanus is conjunct Mars, but let's not worry about that too much at the moment. But so there's Mars, Uranus, Aries point on the pair. Remember, the Aries is the world point. It's what's happening in the world. It's not necessarily about individuals. It is a very violent time we're in, and I think that is further support. And there's that Moon Mercury on the Aries point. So we've got Moon Mercury and Mars Uranus on that. I suppose if you try to put the pair together, you might say, well, communications about violence and Venus Saturn. The Aries point is looking. The Aries point is also on the Venus Saturn midpoint. It's really problematic, the Aries point at the moment, and I think that Venus Saturn, perhaps on a collective level, is about communications between countries breaking down, and so it's a problem, isn't it? Now, having looked at the structure of Mercury stationary retrograde, I just want to look at a few people who may be impacted by this, and I want to start off with a couple of Germans. In terms of the Germans I want to look at, so there is our friend Annalena Baerbock. I think she's still the German foreign minister, isn't she? I don't know how long she'll be foreign minister for. I mean, I think you've got elections coming up next year, but you can see that Annalena Baerbock has a Sun-Neptune conjunction in her chart, and I would have said that Sun-Neptune conjunction is perhaps a little bit dangerous. I mean, Sun Sagittarius, she's someone who has big, fantastic ideas. Sun conjunct Neptune. Neptune is expansive, and she's an enthusiastic supporter of NATO's war against Ukraine. She says some very strange things. I mean, what particularly struck me about Annalena Baerbock was her speech when she talked about the European Union stretching from Lisbon to Luhansk. Luhansk is, of course, the capital of the Luhansk, now part of Russia. Well, from a Russian perspective, Luhansk that region is now almost entirely controlled by Russia. And it was an incredibly provocative thing to say. I'm surprised more people didn't say something about it, but it just had echoes of Germany's past, talking about this big empire from Lisbon to Luhansk. I mean, I've kind of heard that before in sort of some old newsreels. But so that's the kind of person she has. The person she is with Sun conjunct Neptune. And she doesn't fully know what she's doing, I don't think. And so Mercury is going stationary retrograde on this, and I suppose she would have Sun or Neptune. I mean, I don't know whether if you look at the fixed stars, she probably has in terms of where they are in terms of Ras Al Hag. So her Sun is 1.5 degrees from Ras Al Hag, so it's not exactly on. It's not exactly there, but still, Mercury conjunct Ras Al Hag is triggering her Sun Neptune conjunction, and that may be saying something about what she's up to, what she's planning on doing. I suppose Germany. I'm sure she's probably very enthusiastic about Germany sending Taurus missiles to Ukraine and encouraging them to use them however they like. And then we've got Olaf Scholz, who I think is still the Chancellor of Germany, and he has he's a Gemini, and he has got Sun opposition Saturn. So his Sun opposition Saturn is being hit by Mercury going stationary retrograde. And so we can actually see this. So if we put Scholz, So there is Scholz's chart in the middle, and there is his Sun opposition Saturn. So this Mercury is right on his Saturn, right opposition his Sun. So Mercury going stationary retrograde is triggering his Sun opposition Saturn. So I think perhaps his own limitations are being highlighted, and perhaps, his luck is maybe starting to run out here. I mean, he seems to have continued as German Chancellor perhaps longer than expected. Maybe he's got Jupiter rising, but Mercury is hitting his Sun opposition Saturn, and it may actually be hitting the synastry between him and Annalena Baerbock. I don't quite know how Annalena Baerbock and Scholz get on. I think they don't actually get on very well. I mean, I don't really know anything about German politics. But if we put Scholz in the middle and we put Annalena Baerbock on the outer wheel, you can see that there's Scholz's Sun-Saturn opposition, which is right next to Annalena Baerbock's Sun-Neptune conjunction. And then we've got Mercury going stationary retrograde right on the main piece of synastry, and a really difficult piece of synastry between Scholz and Annalena Baerbock. So I would guess that over the next few weeks, there's going to be a lot of arguments between the two. I don't know, maybe there's going to be Annalena Baerbock, maybe she's going to be gung-ho about sending Taurus missiles to Russia, and Scholz is going to have a different view, and maybe that's going to be what it's about. Or maybe it will just be about internal German politics, which I certainly know nothing about. Then looking at the United States, and we have Donald Trump is influence, it gets hit. And so here's Donald Trump's chart, and Donald Trump, he has a full moon at moon. He was born on a Sagittarius full moon, so there's his moon at 2112 Sagittarius, and the Sun is at 2256 Gemini. So what we have here is we have Mercury goes stationary retrograde right on his moon, and actually quite close to his south node. I do think that this is potentially a little bit dangerous for him, and I think he has to be very careful about his decision making. I mean, I understand he's been making a lot of cabinet picks, but Mercury going stationary retrograde on his moon and on his south node, I think perhaps he needs to sort of relax a bit on the cabinet picks and perhaps keep a lower profile. But I think that, I don't think his decision making is going to be great with this, and I think that Donald, he's someone, his mind is always active because he's a Gemini. And so you can imagine his mind is going to be going all over the place over the next few weeks. And so, I mean, as it would anyway, I mean, getting ready to become president. But Mercury is going to, I think, mean that he's not going to be able to stop. And he may just try to do too much or say too much. And I know his enemies are saying that he's been what do they say? Expending his political capital. He's running out of political capital. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I don't think that Mercury conjunct his full moon is helpful, and his son, Barron Trump, doesn't. Of course, he's still only sort of 18, isn't he? But Barron Trump, I think, Barron Trump, I think, is impacted by the Mercury going stationary retrograde. Here is Barron Trump's chart, and so Barron Trump, he's a Pisces, just born on March the 20th, and he has got Mercury going stationary retrograde on his midheaven, and I wonder how that's going to work. I mean, it may be that I mean, it could be, but he finds himself pushed into the limelight. Of course, his mother, there is his Pluto conjunct midheaven. I mean, that's Melania. I think we're getting clearly Melania is very protective of him, and I think he was going to be an elector in the electoral college for Florida, and I think Melania said that wasn't a good idea. She is being very protective, and with Pluto on the midheaven, and I suppose it could be a point which is relating to the mother, and the fact that Barron Trump has got Mercury on the 10th house, something to do with the mother and how he relates to his mother and what he's saying to his mother. But it may also be about how he presents himself, and maybe he will feel that he needs to adopt a higher profile. I don't really know anything about Barron Trump, and I don't want to sort of speculate too much about Barron Trump. I mean, he's only 18, but like it or not, he is a prominent figure, and so it'll be interesting to see. Well, of course, we might never know. I mean, he's in a way he's a quite private person, and certainly his mother wants him to remain a private person. So perhaps we'll never know how Mercury going stationary direct on his midheaven works out. I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily bad. I mean, I think it actually could be quite useful for him. It may have nothing to do with his public life. I mean, I suppose he's just started university. Maybe that says something about, I don't know, his exam results or something like that, or his academic performance. So that's Barron Trump. And Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel Macron is also impacted by this. I'm not convinced that it's necessarily going to make a huge difference, but Emmanuel Macron has his Venus at 21 Sagittarius. We know that Mercury's stationary retrograde on his Venus. We know that France has just allowed Ukraine to use its long-range missiles. I mean, that's against Russia. But I don't think that's necessarily about Mercury stationary retrograde on his Venus. That may say something about his relationship with Brigitte. I don't know. But I suspect we'll never quite know how Mercury going stationary retrograde on his Venus works out. And another person I did mention yesterday, but this isn't necessarily to do with Mercury retrograde. It was Trump's pick to be the Attorney General. What I did forget to say is that it's just interesting that she got picked to be Attorney General when Mercury is in Sagittarius opposition Jupiter, and Mercury and Jupiter in mutual reception. And Pam Bondi, she also has in her chart, she's born on November the 17th with Mercury in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Gemini, so she has a Mercury-Jupiter mutual reception in her chart. So it's kind of interesting that she was picked to be Attorney General at the time when Mercury was in the same sign and Jupiter was in the same sign as when she was born. And yes, they are in mutual reception. And I want to finish with Volodymyr Zelensky, who is impacted by this. And so here is Volodymyr Zelensky's chart. And I want to say a couple of things about it. Firstly, Mercury is going stationary retrograde on his descendant. I mean, we have an approximate time he was born of 2 p.m. I don't know how exact that is. But so Mercury going stationary retrograde on his descendant. I mean, I suppose it could say something about his relationship with his wife, but it could also say something about his enemies and his rivals. And don't forget, enemies and rivals are not just the Russians. I'm sure there are a lot of people in Ukraine who want to get rid of him. So he's got enemies all over the place. I mean, I think that if Zelensky were to be attacked, or there was an assassination attempt on Zelensky, it wouldn't come from. I don't think it would come from the Russians. I think it would come from someone sort of internal to Ukraine. So I think that perhaps with Mercury going stationary direct opposition his ascendant, he does need to be a little bit careful about that. And I want to also consider Mars and Uranus and the Aries point with Volodymyr Zelensky. And, we know that Zelensky is under a lot of pressure at the moment. And I think it might be a good idea to compare if this just to look at there we are. Okay, so this is a somewhat complicated wheel, but what we've got is we have got Zelensky's chart in the middle, and we have got the moment that Mercury goes retrograde on the outer wheel, and I'm not quite sure how much sense this is going to make. If we put the arrow on the Aries point, this is what I'm sort of interested in. So, oops, that's the wrong place. If we put the arrow on the Aries point, okay, sorry. Lot to get through here. And we can see that Volodymyr Zelensky has the Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And I've talked about this quite a lot, the fact that Zelensky has the Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It's very difficult. If you are a world leader and you're involved in a war and you've got the Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, this is suggestive that through your actions a lot of people could die, because Mars-Saturn conjunct, the Mars-Saturn pair is about death. I mean, it can be about death. If you're involved in a war, you're being attacked or you're attacking other people, it's about a lot of people dying. And so he has this configuration here. So he's got that anyway. And we also know that at the time Mercury goes retrograde, there's also a Mars-Uranus midpoint. So the Mars-Uranus, we know that the Aries point is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint right now in real time. And so the fact that Zelensky has Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint at the same time as in the outside world, we've got the Aries point on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. It means that his Aries point is being hit by this Mars-Uranus aspect, obviously, but the fact is that he's got Mars-Saturn there as well. So the lineup between the two charts is potentially quite disturbing. And also, if we, just as a reminder, that Zelensky's, if we put, there's Zelensky's Mars. Let's move this. There's Zelensky's Mars, and of course Zelensky's Mars, he's got Pluto coming up to the conjunction of his Mars, and the opposition of his Mars. So we need to look at Zelensky's chart, and I think that the fact that Zelensky has the Aries point on the Mars aspecting a Mars-Saturn midpoint at the same time as we've got the Aries point on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and the fact that Zelensky has Mars on the opposition Pluto, he has Pluto opposition his Mars. It's all looking really, really difficult, and I think that everyone has to be really careful, but I suppose one has to be optimistic. I mean, I don't think it will turn into a nuclear war, but it really, I must emphasize this point that Biden those behind Biden and also Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are absolutely doing their worst. I'm sorry to go on about this, as I suppose this is the third video in almost so many days when I've kind of made the same point, but I just think it's an important point, and I think it's a point that I think that one has to continue to make. Anyway, that's all for today, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.